So here we are, 20th of January, 2026, and it's a fast-moving world that we're in, and anyone interested in education has got a lot of big questions. What are the futures of education now? We don't have a crystal ball, but there is actually a department in Paris, it's part of UNESCO, called the Futures of Education. There's several different futures that we can forecast in different areas, different parts of the world, moving at different speeds. The last 20 years have been extraordinarily disruptive to the way that human beings have lived for so long. If you take 2007, when the first iPhones came out, 74 days after that, Steve Jobs was describing the 1 million phones that had been sold as a revolution. Whereas today, in 2026, 1 million iPhones are being sold every 36 hours. We had something to the tune of 23% of the world's population using phones and online about a year later. Today, it's about 70%. Most people around the globe have phones and are online. So this is a huge social revolution. Of course, there was the Lehman Brothers crash and what led to the 2008 crash. And most modern historians view that as a turning point in the rise of populism, a distrust in major institutions, and also a wealth wipeout with no real recovery beyond that between those that make money out of stocks and those that are trying to make a living out of wages. So that's had a major impact on society and will last into the future. Our children's opportunities are going to be quite daunting. COVID-19 created a huge deficit in learning across all systems. Some handled it better than others, but it also separated people from one another. There was a promise in the air of maybe changing education systems after COVID, but that never really came around. We went back to SAT tests, to a fairly old-fashioned assessment structure with a lot of pressure on young people. Sometimes I think that we took the worst bits of COVID and kept them. So let's have online meetings during the holidays and over the weekend and before work. And then we sort of dropped the good stuff. But COVID-19 had a major impact on our social organization. And of course, today we're living in the revolution of artificial intelligence, which is growing exponentially. I don't know if you're familiar with situational awareness. It's a pretty brilliant paper by a wunderkind, Leopold Aschenbrenner. And really what it's describing, it's the pace of change in computational power of artificial intelligence. You might have heard of the Hungarian mathematician Paul Erdős, who came up with these problems, about 1,000 of them. Many of them are conjectures. And he offered anywhere from $25 to $5,000 to anyone who could solve them. And he died before solving some of these problems and conjectures, before finding the proofs to them. Well, artificial intelligence just found the proofs to 3 of them. So this is online, cheap or free, open source software operating at a higher level than one of the greatest mathematicians that we'd ever had. I mean, this is a huge question mark that we need to be looking at in education. You know, what are we educating for? What is it saying about knowledge? You might have heard of AlphaFold 3, which is now looking at biomolecular structure predictions. And because of the power of artificial intelligence, it can come up with much more accurate predictions than human beings could. So the field of medicine is evolving at an extraordinary pace because of artificial intelligence. This is a study from UPenn on rare diseases and the diagnosis, the analysis, and potentially the cure being accelerated in a way that human beings with their own resources are just not able to keep up with. So, you know, it's a pretty staggering world that we're living at if you look at the pace of change and what's changing. When ChatGPT came out around about sort of, 2019, it was limited. It was at about the intelligence of a preschooler. Sorry, that's more like 2022. Then we moved to where we are now, which is more of a kind of general intelligence at the level of a very competitive post-doctoral, sort of top-tier engineer. But we're heading towards superintelligence and agentic artificial intelligence, which means that there'll be co-workers handling major projects and doing a whole cycle of analytical sort of white-collar work that human beings presently are doing. So that's the future that we're heading into, and that's what we should be looking at as we think about education reform. There's a price to pay. We know that by the end of 2026, we will have used at least 4.5 times the water consumption of New York City in that 1 year by being online and using artificial intelligence, particularly for things like image generation. So it comes with a huge environmental cost. And then, of course, there is the cognitive cost. You might have heard of this study at MIT showing that there's a considerable, and this is a controlled study, cognitive debt created by an over-reliance on artificial intelligence. And you can understand why. I mean, there's a huge difference between exercising your mind to find an answer, drawing into your long-term memory, and really using your cognition and just typing in a question and getting the answer. And these studies showed the difference between large language model searches, traditional internet searches, and more manual searches. And saw, shouldn't surprise us, there was much more brain activity going on in manual searches. So there's a huge question for us all. And you'll see that the jury's out, and it tends to be a bit extremist. On the one hand, you have sort of gung-ho tech fads. We've got to get on the bandwagon. It's technology at all costs. Don't worry about guardrails and about ethical implications. That'll sort itself out. We have to be ahead at all costs. Let's just keep moving with technology. And, more screens, more tech, isn't it great? Well, there's some problems with that approach. It needs to be more measured. And then on the other hand, you've got, which might seem like the easy response is I sort of want it to go away, and let's just ban technology, and I don't want to see it anywhere. And can we create out of school sort of monasteries or, in environments where the world around us doesn't exist anymore? And can we go back in time? And well, that's not really going to help much either. I mean, that's certainly not preparing young people for the future if that's our approach. I like the work of UNESCO, and they have done some very interesting work on artificial intelligence. It's measured, critical, creative, ethical consideration of artificial intelligence. So we'll be using UNESCO's work on artificial intelligence as our North Star as we navigate this fast-evolving, highly complex, and fundamentally important part of what anyone seriously interested in education is navigating today. It's in French and in English, and we've got connections with UNESCO, which means as an institution that we can really reinforce ourselves through their technical guidance and through their ever-evolving guidelines and standards. If you want to know more about my own personal thoughts on how we can develop a pedagogy of deep thinking in an age of sound bites or critical thinking in an age of generative artificial intelligence, or how we need to move into the curation of knowledge, you can read these articles online that I've published with UNESCO. Now, the phone, it's a symbol for so much, and part of what we're seeing, it's all sorts of problems around learning to live together. The World Health Organization has put out some pretty terrifying reports on mental health. We know that 1 out of 7 10 to 19-year-olds are suffering from some form of depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorder. I'm not saying there's an immediate causal relationship with being online, but quite a lot is showing that there is some kind of correlation. And loneliness. We're kind of alone together. Lots of people all sitting together, but none of them talking. They're all stuck on their phones. And sort of connected with everybody, with all your friends. But what about the real friends? What about your next-door neighbor? We can see this is actually more of a problem in the US than other countries. So loneliness is going to become an increasingly major problem. And then, of course, you've got the social media-fueled solipsism, the silo of reinforcing your own thoughts, going and finding what the algorithm is spewing out at you because it's what you've been looking for before, and never really growing out of your own cognitive bias. And that's just reinforcing division. People are living in a version of reality which is only half of the story. And it's causing a coarsening of discourse. And there are also serious problems around deep fakes, hallucinations, and things that are online that are taken to be true that may or may not be true. And so what's this saying about epistemology, the way that we create knowledge and what we believe in? So there are huge social implications for that we have to consider when we're reflecting on the rise of technologies. We're living in an age of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's really the point. It's not about identifying one narrow technical area and saying, oh, this is the future. Everybody needs to be a coder, or everybody needs to, be brilliant at A or B. It's much more subtle than that. We have to be ready to thrive in increasingly rapid cycles of disruption and in this era of uncertainty. And for a while now, a lot of educational theorists have been talking about the 4 C's. It's almost become trivial, but they're important. So that's collaboration, learning to live with other people. Communication. It's so important to know how to communicate well, compellingly, and to stand up through the way you communicate and the way that you listen to other people as well. Critical thinking, being able to critique information, having an opinion, and creativity. We have to engineer environments where students are able to use knowledge and technology in creative ways. What should the school of the future look like? And what should a great teacher in the 21st century be doing? These are 2 articles I've published with the World Economic Forum. Again, it'll give you an idea of where I'm coming from. But this is not about me. I'm just part of this great community at Lila. It's about us together and how we are going to craft a vision for the next few years in the light of these major global phenomena. So how do we get to this vision? It was through a consultative method. I arrived in October, and I went around a listening and learning journey. And I'm still on that journey, and probably will be for as long as I stay, because we're always learning, and we should always be listening. I mean, when you're a leader, you need to listen. So we surveyed staff using some interesting questions from the Harvard Business School on school culture. And that was at the beginning of the year, and we got about 118 responses. We counted 148 parents who came to the Meet the Head of School meetings. That was 12 hours of meetings. It was really interesting to get to meet the parents and hear what their thoughts are, what their dreams are for Lila. I met with the student council. Of course, student voice is of capital importance. And I'm having these one-to-ones with all employees. Just over 250 of them. It's 15 minutes each. This is going to take a while. But they're great meetings, and you might see me from time to time walking up and down the school with one person having a discussion to get to know them, but also their answers to 2 big questions. What's great about Lila, and what can we improve? Please come forward. Those are at the back. There are lots of seats. We've been working closely with the Board of Trustees, and we have also been working with mission and data and equity audit recommendations. This was work that was done last year. The board is working on the strategic plan, which will be coming out next year. So this vision is part of the plan, but it sort of stands out ahead of it. The plan is going into much more detail about what we want to be achieving over the next 5 years. And I have to say, I really enjoy working with the Board of Trustees. We've got some incredibly intelligent, dynamic people who've welcomed me to Lila, and I think that we're in good hands. So, the 3 things that we want to stand out in this vision, 3 big ideas. 3 is usually good because you can retain that, probably even after some drinks and cheese at the end of this evening. There's a high chance you won't remember most of what I'm saying today, which I'll forgive you for. But if you can remember these 3 things, that's already good. The first is outstanding. This is a big question. What makes Lila stand out? How can we make Lila stand out even more? And then what can we do so that our students stand out, collectively and individually, in this AI-saturated world where it's just becoming incredibly difficult to break through? You need to be able to stand out. The next is this idea of a new chapter. It's the future. The future starts now. What are we doing about this fast galloping future that's arriving at us? Are we going to put our heads in the sand like an ostrich, or are we actually going to do something about it? And how can we create the future that we want and not just be victims of the future that's coming towards us like a freight train? And then there's ensemble. We move into French so that the E fits the E of one, which is the acronym, together. How can we learn together? There's this beautiful paper that was written in the 1990s called The Treasure Within, the Delors report. And the conclusion came up with 4 types of learning: learning to learn, learning to know, learning to be, and learning to live together. And back then in the 90s, Delors realized in this report that it was learning to live together that was probably the most important. Nothing can be created in isolation, nothing of any substance. And schools are one of the last places in the world where people can really, learn together, make friends. There's this wonderful community feel. So much else is isolated from the world of work on, so it's important to retain that. And we have this unique privilege of a very engaged parent community here. We have staff who love Lila. There's a real strong community, so we have to harness that. That gives you the acronym ONE LILA right here in Los Angeles. What a great city, fantastic place to be. So there are 9 steps to get there. So this is where it might be more difficult to sort of remember everything. Because it's 3 for each of those 3. And then unfortunately there are a further 3 steps under each of the 3 under the 3, which makes 27. So I'm going to take you through 27 points, but I'd rather lay out the whole vision for you now than just give you a small snippet of it. But the 9 big steps, and the first 3 are under outstanding. Outstanding. What makes us stand out, and how can we make it stand out even more? Aristotle, he came up with this idea of the phronesis. The phronesis, which comes from the ancient Greek phronimos, it's an ancient idea, and you find it in Socrates and Plato as well. It's that ultimately evil is caused by ignorance. If you really knew what was right and what was wrong, you wouldn't do what was wrong. But you do what's wrong because you don't really know that it's wrong. And it's quite profound. It's what Plato calls the good, the beautiful, and the true. They go together. And this is why knowledge is so important, and this is why critical thinking and intellectual life is so important. We have to ensure that our students are engaging in critical discernment, that they are thinking deeply about the world around them, that they can articulate their thoughts, and they're not just learning things off by heart in some sort of superficial factory line. It's much more profound than that. And I really feel that that's the case at Lila already. When you talk to students, when you engage with them, there's a very high level of critical engagement. Some of you might have heard the story I told when I was giving this lecture on learning to learn about memory and cognitive psychology. I received, and I'd invited some parents, and there were a couple of parents at the back, and then I received this long email saying, dear Dr. Hughes, thank you for the presentation. I'd just like to point out that I'm not quite sure I agree with that, and I've done a lot of work in cognitive science myself, and what you said about Ebbinghaus wasn't quite right, and I initially thought it was a parent, and I was like, oh, come on, parents come and they slate me like that, and then I looked at it more closely. It was a student in grade 11 who'd written this huge critique of what I'd done. And I was just, I don't think I've ever received such an impressive message from a student. I'm assuming it wasn't done on ChatGPT. No, I'm kidding. It definitely wasn't, because I had an engagement with the student afterwards. And I said, I'll write your college recommendation, that's for sure, because there's a beautiful story to tell you. So it's already happening, including with the younger students. They're very forthcoming, they ask lots of questions. But we need to take it even further. We need to be strong at debate. We've got a debate club, but we want debate happening in the primary years, and we want debate in French. We want to maybe move into mock trials, and to be even stronger in Los Angeles as a school that is very powerful at rhetoric, at public speaking, at debate. This is a fundamental part of what it means to be meaningfully educated in today's world. We're going to deepen the Learning to Learn program. That's about metacognition. Metacognition is learning how to learn. We know so much more about learning today than we ever have, the way that your mind works, the way that your brain works. So students need to know that, and we need to give them study skills, habits, revision techniques. So there's a program that we started with grade 12s that we're going to be expanding to as many students as possible, at least moving from high school through to middle school. And there's an emphasis on maths. I did get quite a lot looking at our results, where I think we can be stronger, but also from parents on a feeling that we can be even stronger in mathematics. So we're not going to shy away from that, and we're going to really grapple with maths. I always say there are only three types of people, those that are good at maths and those that are bad at maths. So I have to put that joke in whenever I discuss maths. You know? It's not the greatest joke, but you know. I've got a couple of others, but let's not take us off the point. We're extending our guidance counseling. So we're going to add a full-time guidance counselor here from next year because we want to lower the ratio of students to university guidance counselors. I'm talking about college counseling here. And we want to start counseling further upstream for younger students and have even more expertise in universities, including non-North American universities. We're adding examinations to grade 10 in the MYP to sit alongside the brevet for the French bac for a bit of academic rigor. And the team here under Mathieu have actually come up with quite a clever way of doing it. It'll be with a formative purpose, so it's not right at the end of the year. It's going to give students feedback on how they're doing to help them with their choices for their IB diploma subjects later on. The Strong to the Finish program is for grade 12s. That's micro-teaching of modules that they've been studying to sort of do a revision course for the students for a whole intensive week before the exams. We want them to do well academically. We want students to get to the best universities, but we want them to leave Lila as Lila lifers, or even if they've only been here for a few years, with that wonderful critical discernment in both languages. That's all about critical thinking. It's something that makes us stand out, and we want to take it even further. The Learning to Learn sessions have already started. Some of this has already started. Wittgenstein, the quixotic Austrian British philosopher, he wrote in this brilliant book called Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which is not actually as dense and unreadable as it sounds. It's quite short. He said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." That's a very, very interesting statement. And that really speaks straight away to Lila because we're a bilingual institution. And we know that bilingualism is good for you cognitively, neurologically, socially, culturally, obviously emphatically, the way you communicate. So it's something we do well. I think the bilingual profile of students here is nothing short of miraculous. When I see children in the primary school speaking really good French and their parents can't speak French, I think this is extraordinary. And it's something that we have to nurture and make even stronger. Because the feeling is that it's quite difficult to sustain bilingualism in an Anglophone environment. We're not in an immersive environment. We need to do more for French. And there have been some decisions that we're going to review to make sure that we're developing as much cognitive, academic language proficiency in French as possible, not just basic interpersonal communication skills. First thing is to exchange with other French international schools in the region, in the AEFE network. And we've already started that with a trip to New York in February. We've chosen 6 students after a selection to go to the French International School of New York for an immersive theater weekend. We're talking to the Lycée Français. I visited them. There's some interesting history between Lila and the Lycée Français, you might know. So I thought it was good to go and say hello, and we're all on side here. And we'd like our students to exchange with them. I've also been talking to San Diego, and the ideas from next year will have some interesting projects for students so that they can meet other students in French in the region. We want to see more French theater, Molière, Racine, for example. That's a bit old-fashioned, that. Yasmina Reza, across the secondary and primary schools. And we're going to relook the way that we've been doing the bilingual program, particularly at Los Feliz, and put that hour back in where it was taken out. Education, it's not scientific, it's also ideological, and so there's not always an easy right or wrong answer. But after some discussion, we think it's good for us to go back to as strong a kind of pillar of French as possible in that. We've already started the French Debate Club. There are 2 teachers here who are running it, and they're launching into this program that's been designed, in fact, by l'Éducation nationale in France, and they'll be discussing artificial intelligence. So you'll be hearing more about that as it evolves. And as I said earlier, the school's paying for some students to go off to New York every year. We want this to be an annual tradition, and for there to be others, where students have some opportunities to widen their network of communication and experiences in French. We carry on. You might have heard this quote. I quite like it. It's been around for a while. The illiterate of the 21st century will be not those who can read and write, although reading and writing is probably not a bad thing, but those who can learn, those who cannot unlearn, learn, and relearn. In other words, you're illiterate if you don't know how to unlearn and relearn. It's that relearning. So how can we be as dynamic as possible and stand out for it? This is what we're calling future fitness. How can the whole institution create an environment where students are brought to think about the future in such a way that it's dynamic, that it's generative? The first is our approach to belonging, to diversity, equity, inclusion. This is about preparing students for an increasingly interconnected world. We want them to be culturally literate when they go off to university and out into the world, not just to espouse Lila values, but to be able to negotiate diversity in a dynamic way. We know that diverse teams perform better. The world is becoming increasingly diverse, and we owe it to our students to strengthen that experience. So that's work that's ongoing, and it remains central to Lila's identity. There's artificial intelligence. We're going to design a strong policy. We've already started working on it, using UNESCO's guardrails and guidelines, and a broader approach to technology. The use of screens, of phones, that's something we have to keep reviewing. And so we'll be looking at that closely, and you'll be seeing our policy come out next year. And then a life skills program. So we're giving ourselves a bit more time to develop this, but essentially the dream is that while studying academic mainstream subjects, students are also taken on a journey to develop their entrepreneurship, their health literacy, their scientific literacy, their data literacy. There are different ways of doing this. There's sort of weaving it into the current academic program or having standalone courses. But it's something I did at the International School of Geneva. We came up with our own certificate called the Learner Passport. It's something I'm passionate about. And there's a lot of collective intelligence here from our parents and from our partners so that we can really design a journey that's not just developing good test takers, but future fit learners. Those are the first 3 steps under O, which is outstanding. Next 3 are under N for new chapter. So that's all about what's new, what are some of the big projects coming up. And let's start with sports. You know, sports is such an important part of education, and we have to up our game in sports. We don't have the facilities that our students deserve to take it to the next level. And in this beautiful quote by Nelson Mandela, you know, we're reminded that sports is much more than just athletic competition. It's also about bringing people together. It has this wonderful social purpose. So there's Lila 28. We're looking at 2028 as this big year with the Olympic Games, and the first sort of dream is our new sports and cultural center. So a gym that will be on the Pickwick site, not far from here, with fantastic facilities. We're going to use this opportunity to develop the arts as well, so it's about culture and sports. During the Olympics, we want to really focus on sports for peace. I don't know if you know about the Olympic Games, but of course they were invented in Athens. But it was Coubertin, a French historian and educator, who rebaptized the Olympics at the end of the 1800s and invented the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. And the whole idea there was that the Olympic Games brings people together. It's a way of competing, but in a peaceful way. And sometimes when you look at international institutions today, you wonder who's done better. You know, is it them or is it actually something like the World Cup or the Olympic Games? They've got this incredible federating power. So we want our students to reflect on that and for us to have something in our academic program that's really reflecting sports for peace. And I'm excited about this. It's going to be part of our vision. And then there's us being involved with the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. We want to be helping with the games in any way we can. There are a lot of discussions going on at board level about us working potentially with an Olympic team and at least as good citizens of our different cities, because we're also in the city of Burbank, to be supporting the Olympic Games. Yeah, the Lila 28 gym is just imagine. You can almost close your eyes and think, you know, no more playing basketball on tarmac, you know. We're actually in a wonderful sports hall. We've got bleachers. We've got something that we deserve. We have to build this gym, and we're going to need a lot of community support for it. We're going to have to come together so that we can fund this project. We're working very, very actively with our Director of Development into the funding of it, but we will be reaching out to the community, and this is a worthwhile investment. It's for the legacy of the school, and it's for the betterment of every student. And while I've got the slide up, rest assured that we're working hard on our CapEx projects across the different campuses. We're looking at the Shades installment at West Valley, which has been something that we've been wanting to do for a while, so we're accelerating that. There's a project to build a pedagogic structure over the swimming pool, which is not much of a swimming pool, unless you want to do basically 2 strokes before you get out. It's not being used anyway. So we can actually do something a little bit more purposeful with that space. There's a lot to do at Los Feliz. We want to resurface the ground. There's work to be done on the soccer pitch. I'm not saying we can do all of this straight away during summer, but you will see this improvement, and you will hear about what we need to get there through time. There's some basketball court reparation. We want to look at the track at Burbank, and then, of course, this major ONE LILA project of LILA 28. At Pasadena, one of our challenges is the relationship we have through our rental agreement, so that's more at the interpersonal level, and we're working hard to find an optimal solution there. So a lot going on around our campus footprint beyond LILA 28. This quote from Marie Curie is about giftedness. We're all gifted in some way. I believe that. I think every child has a gift, and a great educator needs to find the gift and turn it into a talent. Those are 2 different things. You can be gifted but not talented, but you can't be talented if you weren't gifted. But for the gift to become a talent, it needs to be nurtured. You need a coach. You need care. You need a program. Gift is a rough diamond, and young children are rough diamonds, but they need to be chiseled into the concert level pianist, or the great athlete, or the scientist, or the spokesperson, or the educator, whoever it might be. Socially recognized gifts become talents. And the principles of gifted education can really help us deliver a powerful education program. We're calling it Educate 2030. And that's a photograph of me with Pedro Noguero, who's the Dean of the Rossier School of Education at USC. We're partnering with USC to create a teacher training program so that every teacher at LILA has a certificate which has really shown that they have done the necessary work to upskill themselves in critical areas such as mastery teaching, such as DEIB, such as working with neurodivergent students, and centrally the principles of gifted education. There's this other step within the step called stretch. We need to be stronger at stretching all students who may be struggling to integrate the curriculum for a whole variety of reasons, and the students who are bored, who already know what they're being taught, who can be pushed further and they're not being pushed enough. That's a tragedy, having students who are loafing around in class because we can't stretch them. And then we wind up blaming them and saying, oh, well, they're not listening properly. It's like, you're going to listen to something that you're bored about? No, it's easier said than done. Okay, it's not just the sort of something you can snap your fingers around and see happen. But we'll really be flying when we're stretching even more students. And using the principles of gifted education practice, which is a fantastic, liberating pedagogy. And we're thinking of the whole LILA offer for our younger learners and maybe expanding our early learning centers so that we can get even younger students joining the LILA journey. Whether we actually materializes or not is something to be seen, but the leadership team feels it's important just to focus on that. So this is about stretching our students, about teacher training, about education, right at the core of everything. Martha Nussbaum, fantastic scholar, she talks about storytelling, and we all talk about storytelling. We don't do enough of it in the classroom, which is why we have a speaker series. The idea is very simple. It's you take movers and shakers, people who are shaping the world, put them in front of students and tell their story. It's an emotional, direct, authentic way of communicating. So much of what we do in schools, it's indirect, it's abstract, and it's sort of trying to get into the teacher's head, and then you've got these tests that are more or less valid, and then there's some bias in the way that it's a very roundabout way sometimes of getting there. Whereas there's something really, really powerful about someone telling their story and young people just listening and thinking, oh, maybe I could do that one day. Maybe I could be like that. Like, oh, this is inspiring. So there'll be a speaker a month and addressing all the different campuses through time, mainly from our parent community, inspiring the students on what it means to be at the cutting edge of any industry, really, in the 21st century. We're going to open a podcast. We've already got a podcast in the Lead Alliance, which is great. This will be a slightly different one, filmed, where we are interviewing thought leaders, and a lot of them are parents, and some of our students on the question of intelligence. What is intelligence, and what should it be? And that theme might change from year to year, but we want to sort of raise the profile of Lila through this level of storytelling. And we want to run education conferences, probably one every second year, with another AEFE school. That's the Agence d'enseignement de langue étrangère, so basically the wing of French international schools. Storytelling, Lila as a thought leader. Here's some images from our guest speakers. We had Mila Jovovich, who was fantastic here not long ago, and pretty soon we'll have Dr. Huang and Kate Christine, all about positive mindset, and they'll be addressing not only the students here, but also the grade 5s at Los Feliz. We come to the last 3 steps of our journey, our 9-step journey. Ensemble, together. Confucius in his Analects, writing at an interesting period of Chinese history, when there was a lot of political brinksmanship and speech-making and sort of corrupt politicians. He talked about the Ren. The Ren is this idea that many hands make light work, that together we're so much stronger. And that community feel comes out best in what we call rallying points in schools. You know, we need more assemblies, we need more community gatherings, we need to bring everybody together to celebrate Lila and to just enjoy the here and now. You take the Joshua Tree at Pasadena, that's a wonderful program. I mean, I haven't been on it yet, but I've heard about it. I kind of heard about it almost before I heard about Lila. It's like a big thing. We should do something similar across all schools. Maybe not exactly the same, because of course, you know, the schools have different populations and sizes and what have you, but the idea is to have some sort of field trip or rallying point that engages the whole community every year. Sports day. You have to have a great sports day in a school, and that should involve track and field, different activities, everybody together in a stadium, and we'll be launching our first sports day of this type. I'm not saying there've never been sports days in the history of LIDA, but I think this one will be a bit unique. And it'll go from grade 1 up a little bit later in the year. We're still identifying the date, but we're going to go to a stadium, and you'll be hearing about that. And we want, you know, high-level competition, but also fun and school spirit. And then a film competition. I mean, we're in Hollywood. You know, we should be doing something about film beyond offering it maybe in one subject. And the idea is to have a bilingual film competition with a panel of judges made up of parents and maybe connections of parents, and to see what kind of creative work the students can come up with, because I'm pretty sure they can dazzle us. Mathieu and I were just looking the other day at the films that students created to get selected for that trip to New York, and it's impressive what they can come up with. So we need to unleash that creative potential. Last 2 steps. This one's about mentorship. That quote from Oprah Winfrey. It's, you know, I'm a big believer in coaching. And how do you get to a place where you have real flourishing? It's through a strong growth and evaluation pathway. Everybody needs to grow. Everybody needs to get feedback, students and adults. They need to know, where am I going? How am I doing? And where to next? So the first is we start with the students. And we've started this program already with the grade 8s, and we're going to use that pilot to improve our services and do it for every student across the organization. This is the dream from next year. At least 2 check-ins with a trusted adult every year, looking at the whole journey. How are things going in the playground? How's it going with your friends? How are you doing academically? What are your goals? You have to have an academic and social supervisor checking in with every student at least twice a year, if not more. If not, children fall through the cracks, and there are lots of different people seeing them in different ways, but you need one person who's following the student through, a mentor. And we're going to do the same thing with the adults. Every supervisee will have a supervisor who has one-to-one check-ins with them, who's looking after them and making sure that they're getting evaluated every year and that there's a growth pathway. And this is leading, when it comes to staff, to optimizing our employee conditions. It's work we have to do, and by 2027, 2028, we want to have reviewed our compensation, our packages, the way that we are onboarding, looking after staff to make sure that we're even stronger. I call it one-to-one for everyone. So the dream is that, through time you'll see more and more one-to-one conversations happening, in a suitable open space with guidance so that everybody's getting that one-to-one care. And there's a lot of research to show that, children need one trusted adult in school. It's so important. So you have to engineer that for it to happen. I'm picking up some strange sounds in the room, and I'm trying to figure out, is that artificial or is it human? I think it's human. That's okay. That's fine. I love this quote because of where it's coming from, but also what it's saying. You can't talk about the world and the future without talking about sustainability. And sustainability is not just environmental sustainability, but structural and organizational sustainability. We're doing it for the future, so that we don't colonize the future, so that we leave some space open for our children and our students. Ecological stewardship, which is pushed hard by the AEFE, is something that we want to be even stronger at through our pedagogic programs and through our commitment to carbon footprint reduction in just about everything we do, building projects, the way that we behave. So that's a project that will start next year. And this is not to say it hasn't already started, but we're really sort of baptizing it next year. Robotics and STEM. Robotics is such a wonderful way of learning some of the basic principles of mechanical engineering, of electronics, of coding. It's quite cheap and easy to roll out, more or less. So we'd like to do that and to really sort of reboost our whole approach to technology and in the secondary STEM, but with a focus on ecological challenges. So there's that ethical reflection going on. It's not just about creating robots that are going to put people out of work, but it's actually thinking about ecological problems as a way into STEM. And then there's financial sustainability, which is, as an institution, how can we be even more robust going forward? And that obviously moves into the strategic plan. That's just a good discipline about us really reinforcing the legacy of the school. So those are the 9 steps. Now, I'm not a favor of people who say, well, we're not going to put dates to it. It'll happen sometimes, because sometimes never. So the dates. What this means is this is when we want to start these projects, when we want to launch them. So that's what it looks like through time. We might fall short in some of these. Some of them might peter out. We might have to bring new ones in as well, because you have to be active. You can't be completely static. But this is what you should be seeing over the rollout of the next few years, alongside all the other business as usual and the work we have to do to optimize communications and services in general to take this great school even higher. But these are some special projects that we will be driving across the institution.